they say iron sharpens iron, and I sense that that's been what's happening here this weekend as we've been dialoguing, as I've been hearing your stories of success, as well as some of the challenges that you've faced in different aspects of your ministry. Some of those things have been shared up front. Other things we've talked about in person as we have visited over the meals, as we've walked together. So it's been a great time to be here and just to get better acquainted with some of you that I've never met before, as well as some of my new friends. So it's been a privilege to be here in the Pacific Northwest. And we're thankful, too, that the weather has cooperated so nicely for us. I know some of you are looking outside right now, you're wondering what kind of cooperation that is, but we have enjoyed the fact that having been in this part of the country before, we've gotten our definitely a good share of nicer weather than we've had other trips to this part of the country. So, for what it's worth, it's good to be here together. We want to begin today by just making a few general remarks as we bring ourselves up to speed with where we were not all that long ago together. I tried to rearrange a few of my slides here to try to give us a little bit of a review, as well as an overview of where we are headed in this, my final CME presentation. So we're talking, yes, about the subject of hemorrhoiology. If you were not with us on Friday, it is the science of blood fluidity. We're talking about how to impact this very important variable, if you will, as far as overall health. We're going to be looking in more detail at strategies that can actually help us to do that. But before we do, let me see how we've got this. Boy, I thought I had this rearranged for you on the fly here real quickly. That's what I'm looking for. Okay, so what we did already is hopefully we gave you insights into at least 5 different ways that improving hemorrhoiology could improve or help address and help us then to motivate patients or community members to implement lifestyle changes. So give me 5 or more examples of things that we saw that hemorrhoiology impacts. At least 5 disease states. Can you help me? What? Stroke. Yes, excellent. Any others? Blood pressure. What else? Macular degeneration and glaucoma we looked at. What else? Diabetes and its complications, especially, yes. Anything else come to mind? You could have mentioned heart disease, cognitive decline. We didn't talk a lot about physical performance. We could have spoken in more detail about arthritis. So there's a number of things. And so I see that as a group, you've come away with at least 5 of those. We're especially focused now on how we can use this, how we can leverage this to make a difference in virtual faith community encounters. Virtual, obviously, being of much more relevance today than it was a few years ago, as well as in-person community-based health programming. And with that in mind, we will be thinking about some issues that some of you deal with. I've met some of you who have a special interest in helping people lose weight. We'll talk about how certain types of exercise might be incorporated into the regimen to especially impact hemorrhoiology. We'll make a few connections with smoking cessation, and we will also talk a little bit more about over-the-counter supplements. We began on that journey. Remember, we talked about caffeine, and we talked some about alcohol as well. So this is some review. You identified many of these things as far as things that hemorrhoiology can impact. And the particular intervention I shared with you, something that we've been working with, is a free resource for you. It's at timelesshealinginsights.org. Some of you have been talking with me about our radio show. By the way, if you've never been my guest on American Indian and Alaska Native Living, I am hoping to sign some of you up before I leave. And we do phone-based interviews that are pre-recorded. And if you have something you'd like to share, I've heard a number of exciting stories. I started talking with some of you about getting you on my schedule, but our show goes out on a weekly basis. You can access that show from the Timeless Healing Insights website as well. But the special intervention we have here is a 30-day program. It's especially targeting diabetes and high blood pressure, but it's using these hemorrhoiology principles. So the idea is we talk a lot about translational science, so it's not just having information, but how do we translate that into clinical practice? And so this is one of the tools that we've been using with our patients for several years. We've just automated it, so now if someone jumps on, one of your patients goes to timelesshealinginsights.org, they can sign up for the program every day. They'll get an email reminder with a link, and when they click on that link, they'll come into my office for 6 minutes, very informal, no big production quality performance there, but it's just me talking in my office to someone like they were there for a 6-minute visit. And we found people, and we've got some great videos, testimonials, people that have had some really good experiences with that. You can use this as a community-based program, as a platform for it. So we did this fall. Still, there's a lot of concerns with COVID, so most of our participants were virtual. We did have people that came out to our local church for it. We met once a week for 4 weeks. We had a 1-hour evening meeting, and those meetings were recorded. You also can access them. I'll give you the links there. If you're wanting to do a community-based program with free handouts on there that you can just print out, so it's all there for you, okay? So we tried to keep the barriers as low as possible for you to do something. Some of you are doing much better programs than I put together here, okay? You just did Diabetes Undone, much more polished program and resources, and manuals, and cookbooks. But we do a few recipes, and it's something that if you're trying to get your feet wet with your patients or your community and want to wade into something that's not controversial, we haven't had anyone raising big concerns about it. So all it is just jumping on there, signing up. And if you want to go through it first, just check it out, do that. I definitely wouldn't encourage you to run a program that you've never experienced. Okay? So we've been talking about some things that you can do to improve blood fluidity. And I want to just pause here, because this focus right now is on community and engaging with our patients and communities. I want to make some remarks here, maybe try to draw some things together. Maybe I'll even draw from Roger, because I was inspired yesterday. I just have to admit that. I was inspired. And after listening to Roger's testimony, I kind of dug through, metaphorically speaking, my search engine here, and reminded myself of something that appears in Christian Temperance and Bible Hygiene, page 121. And listen to this, I think it's profound. Much of the prejudice that prevents the truth of the third angel's message from reaching the hearts of the people might be removed if more attention were given to health reform. Now, a lot of people just stop with that sentence, but don't, because you got to keep reading on. When people become interested in this subject, the way is often prepared for the entrance of other truths. Hang in there with me, because here's the critical sentence. If they see that we are intelligent in regard to health, they will be more ready to believe that we are sound in Bible doctrines. Christian Temperance and Bible Hygiene, page 121. So what is the corollary here? The corollary is that there will be people, and you might say, I'm reading into it a little, I don't think much. If they don't see we're intelligent in regard to health, then what will happen? Is it fair to say they may be less ready to believe that we're sound in Bible doctrines? And this is the tension that we're at. So, and I'm trying to do this in a way that, I want to tell you, I love what you've done here this weekend, okay? Because I have really sensed here a spirit for amen to be very, very embracing as far as what's happening in your conference and in the neighboring conference. And I've just sensed that I've met with many of you. I've met people who are, doctors and subspecialists, and I've met folks that are doing exciting things like they're, helping people in their community lose weight. I've met other people who, are engineers and, work in packaging factories. And so we've just got this diverse group of people here, and I think that's exciting, right? But one of the challenges when we realize, and we're casting this vision of every member being a medical missionary, the problem is when we wade in to start, how do we present things in an intelligent way? Yes, on a certain level, the Holy Spirit wants to guide us all, right? We have that promise. If any of you lack wisdom, what do we need to do? Ask of God. He loves to pour out liberally His blessing of wisdom. But the problem is, we all come at different levels. And let me just tell you, as a professional, I'm sure we're all the same way. If something new comes out, or if I have a patient walk into my office right now, for those of you who don't know what I'm doing, so I pastor full-time, and that full-time, my conference and my local church has been very generous as to what full-time pastoring looks like in Fort Wayne, because they know they give me allowance to travel and do some speaking, and I do work with Native Ministries, do the weekly radio show, so some other things that necessarily may not be under the typical umbrella of a pastor. They also allow me 1 day a week to do telemedicine. So I'm still working in the clinical practice I worked with for a number of years in Northern California, doing telemedicine, okay? So where I'm going with this is, so a patient walks into my virtual office, and they say, I've got von Hippel-Lindau disease. Okay, and I say, von Hippel-Lindau disease. Oh, man, I saw that. I think I heard about that in medical school. So what am I going to do? So I'm going to, what maybe you do too, you go to UpToDate, right? And, I'm going to look and say, what's the latest on this, and, what do I need to be looking for? Have they been, worked up properly? So why do I go to UpToDate? If you're not familiar with UpToDate, this is these are experts in every area of medicine that they pool together, that on a monthly basis they're reevaluating the literature and their protocols and their guidelines so that there's a trustworthy place that you can go. Now, when I read something in UpToDate, that's not the end of it, right? But it's giving me an overview, and I'm still going to maybe do some fact-checking if I read something and I see some references, and they say, I don't know, that doesn't sound completely right from my vantage point as a Seventh-day Adventist practitioner, right? And I might say, I've used some other things, and it sounds similar to this. Okay, so where I'm going with all this is every one of us develops in our mind certain places, go-to places that we think are reliable places to go for medical information, okay, because we're speaking of medical information. And why I'm talking about this in a CME lecture is because our communities do that as well, okay? So if you already have a place in your community, and you should, I don't as a medical care provider, my community, I've got one of my patients who's not an Adventist right now. He surprised me the other day. I was visiting with him. He said, I really like that woman who comes in on Wednesday night prayer meeting. And so he's watching I knew he was coming to watching some of our church services, but he's been watching our prayer meetings. And he was commenting on one of the participants, one of my church members, and he was saying how he liked her questions. My point is, so my sphere of influence, though, medically, clinically, is not in Fort Wayne, which is unusual. Most of you, your sphere of influence is probably where you're at. I think I met a few of you who are, traveling or doing locums work, out of the area. But my point is, you already have some people that identify with you as a trustworthy source in your community, right? So here's where I'm going with this. A lot of the people that sit in our pews, a lot of the people that are interested in being medical missionaries, they don't know what those trustworthy sources are, okay? And because they've been ministered to in a certain area, they think, well, this person must be a reliable resource. Yesterday, my burden, when I shared the video clip that I shared yesterday, was not to try to disparage anyone, okay? That was not my point. But my point was, the two individuals that were depicted yesterday are individuals that have personally blessed me, and they've blessed many of you as well. One of those individuals, though, in the circles that I deal with, has been one of the most influential people among certain segments of my audience, both in my local church and people that interact with me, in purveying misinformation about the COVID-19 pandemic. And I'm just saying that, and it's from my perspective, it's from people that I interact with, and I've had to work with people trying to address some of these things. But if you already say, well, that's up to date for me, okay, that is the reliable resource, then what my reason for sharing that was with you yesterday is that it doesn't undermine someone's ministry desire. It doesn't undermine their value to you spiritually. It doesn't mean that they didn't lead you. I was so thankful for Roger yesterday when you put up that quote from Martin Luther. I thought that was so much on point. But we look to Martin Luther as an inspiration, right? But we're not going to leave tomorrow and join the Lutheran Church, are we? So my point is, just because God has led someone and leads us and speaks to us through someone's ministry doesn't mean necessarily that they should be our go-to source when it comes to a certain discipline. My whole point yesterday of sharing something that has been invalidated is to show you that the individuals that I was depicting are not individuals who are concerned about doing careful research and the topics that they share. Now, some of you say, well, that's a leap. And some of you talked with me about it. But I'm just saying, as someone who's a researcher, I've published research, I've presented at many scientific meetings, I mean, I would not do something that I'm going to put out to the public that I could vet in a few minutes and find that it's questionable. Now, some of you said, well, maybe the people that questioned it were wrong, and I appreciate that. We should have that spirit of always trying to give people credit for the most gracious motives. But remember, what's the statement? Let me read it one more time. Christian Temperance and Bible Hygiene, page 121. You all know what 121 is, don't you? It's 11 squared, okay? By the way, part of the key to memory is attention. If you're attentive to what it is, Christian Temperance and Bible Hygiene, page 121. Much of the prejudice that prevents the truth of the third angel's message from reaching the hearts of the people might be removed if more attention were given to health reform. When people become interested in this subject, the way is often prepared for the entrance of other truths. If they see that we are intelligent with regard to health, they will be more ready to believe that we are sound in Bible doctrines. And so where I'm going with this is because it doesn't mean, I got to tell you the truth. People have told me it's obvious to them that I'm not following the Adventist health message. If I were, I would have a full head of hair. No, I'm serious. I've heard that more than once, okay? No, I don't hear it a lot, okay? I don't hear it a lot, but I have heard that more than once. And they'll show me. I think someone even once sent me some, article that said, vegetarians have more hair or something. So obviously they knew that I was cheating, somewhere on the sly or... Here's my point, though. Is it wrong that the optimal diet is a total vegetarian diet? Is that wrong? So here's the problem. If you don't have good standards for evidence, you'll read something. Look at those who adopted the total vegetarian diet. A Native American population was studied. And this indigenous population, I work a lot with Native people. No baldness at all. Totally plant-based diet. Now, how many of you are impressed? How many of you are ready to move with some of my friends in the Pima tribe out there in Arizona, and you're going to say, give me the corn, the beans, the squash, the three sisters. I want to get on this plant-based eating how many of you think that my hair is going to start growing back? See, those of you that have a research mind, you say, well, I think there's a confounding variable there. There's something else in the equation, right? And there's certain races that their hair follicles are more sensitive to testosterone than others. And my friends in Indian country, they are blessed. If you want to say blessed, some might say they're cursed because I can make more vitamin D outside than they can, but just depends on your perspective, right? You're following along with me. So here's where I'm going with this. What I'm trying to help us see is who are trustworthy information sources when we work together as a community, because we all came here together. Who is the person that you want to say, who are the go-to people? And I just want to tell you, and I'm not actually, I think I've let my Amen membership lapse, and I'm glad, so no one can say there's a conflict of interest here. But I found Amen to be a reliable resource. Okay, so these are dedicated Christian health professionals, Seventh-day Adventist health professionals that are trying to be true to medical science, trying to be true to inspiration. And the Lord has put these people in our church because He wants us to work collaboratively. And, if you're wanting to do a program in your church, try to involve someone who has that level of training. Now, I'm not saying just because someone's got an MD or an RN or the DDS or the, DRPH or whatever letters you've got after your name or RD, you understand what I'm saying. That doesn't make you infallible. It doesn't make you any better than anyone else. But most individuals with professional training have more background in standards of evidence. But having said that, now here's why I'm going, because I'm going to be showing you some studies today again. So you may think this is tangential, but it's right on point because we're speaking about reaching our communities, ministering to our populations, and if they don't have confidence in what you're sharing. And so here's my point. Something might be true. I'm going to be sharing with you lifestyle data. And we talk, in the medical field, we say, what is the kind of gold standard when it comes to research? Yeah, randomized controlled trial, RCT, and especially if it can be double-blinded, right? So neither the participants nor the investigators know who's getting the intervention. Now tell me how you do that with lifestyle interventions. How do you do a blinded study of exercise? You can't do it, okay? You might be able to blind investigators. They may not know what group someone's in. You've got people looking at the data who, don't know what the participants are doing. But can you be in an exercise study and not know whether you're exercising? No, so that's not going to happen. Years ago, there was a paper, I didn't have time to look it up this morning. It was titled something like The Plight of Plant Drug Research. And the whole article was written about, well, why don't we have equal evidence for natural therapies as we do for pharmacologic therapies? And the obvious reason is who's going to pay for the study on broccoli? Okay? If we did a study and showed that broccoli lowered cholesterol, dramatically, well, and we want to do a huge randomized controlled trial, we're going to hide the broccoli and other things, and this. And by the way, there's some Seventh-day Adventists have done some great, really randomized controlled trials using diet. I mean, some of you were, students of Dr. Sabate there at Loma Linda, and a lot of his work with nuts and things, doing. Hiding nuts in different recipes and seeing. So, you can, but you need funding to do research. I mean, I've done clinical research, and I've sometimes not published clinical research because there wasn't funding just for the time to do it. Okay, so we can, you do a study, but you say, are you going to write it up and you're going to submit it and all? And it's just, well, there's too many other things going on. So it actually takes great organizational resolve to do research, and it takes finances. So I tell you all that because it's not a level playing field. So I'm going to show you data today that often it's not in randomized controlled trials. But the question is it biologically plausible? That's one of the questions we're asking, right? Is there a mechanism where this would work? Is there data that supports it? So there's different levels of evidence, but you say, as a community, we check each other. So in the medical community, if I submit a paper to be published, what's going to happen? It's going to go out to peer review, right? So presumably other people that have expertise in that area are going to review my paper. And they're going to say, you know what, we don't like this. We don't like, how it was randomized. Or it should have been a stratified randomization. And so, are they going to, they're going to give all kinds of, feedback. They may give some feedback, and they may say we think the paper should be published, or they may give feedback and send it back. Say they won't publish it. Okay, they may reject the paper. Well, you say, well, how does that happen in the Adventist church? How do we have peer review? So do I get offended? I submitted a paper a few years ago that was rejected. I've had others that were accepted, but, and sometimes you look at the reviewer's comments and you say, how did they just miss the point? I mean, what's their problem? Why could they not see this? And it's often with the study design or something, and a lot of what I have done over the years is community-based, research. So anyway, that's another story. But so I may disagree with it, but I'm not going to say, the medical community is corrupt because they didn't, publish my paper. And, I'm not going to submit anything anymore, just forget about it. Well, how does that work in the church? And so I'm talking with you about specific things I'm showing you an intervention here that impacts hemorrheology. So what happens if I'm sharing this intervention with you and you look at an aspect of it and you say, I think DeRose is wrong. I mean, why is he... I mean, that's pretty shaky. You know, it's just a small study. Just think, I want you thinking about quality of evidence as I go through some of this. If you're uncomfortable, does it mean you shouldn't have anything to do with the program? I mean, I'll be honest with you. I don't know that there's any program I've done or anyone's done that I think is perfect. Some of you know I've done some publishing. I've worked as an editor as well. And someone was telling me a funny story in publishing. This is a fellow who's worked in big publishing outfits, and he said there was this I think some big publisher. They said we're going to do a perfect book. Okay, we're going to make sure we're going to do extra editing and everything, so there's going to be no mistakes in this book. And he said there's a mistake on the first page. Okay? And it's just, part of it is, it's the Lord wants us to be humble. He wants us working together. So what I just want to challenge ourselves with is don't be offended, and I'm going to try not to be offended, even though I don't like it. I like everyone to say, oh, that was wonderful. We used your program in our church, and our whole community changed, and now everyone's lined up at the church door on Sabbath morning, and we're upset with you because you didn't help us raise funds for the, church sanctuary enlargement and the 3 other church plants in our community. Sure, that's the narrative we'd all like to see. But here's the point. Can we be open enough with each other that I can share something with you like I shared with you yesterday morning? And I can say, and I can tell you that when someone gets up and they quote something that's been invalidated, that this undermines your credibility. Now, some of you I've told you, we had this dialogue. You say, well, maybe the people undermining the... No, but let's stay away from those questionable things. There's enough things that there's a wealth, a consensus that we can all embrace. Okay, I've probably belabored that point too long, but I think it's really important as we move forward together, because it doesn't matter what happens in a seminar like this. There's going to be things you disagree with. You can say, that person didn't use very good standards of evidence, but say, well, what can I learn from this? And so I'm being sensitive, because I realize here, look at this, effective blood donation on the physical fitness and hemorrheology of healthy elder donors. A lot of these are observational studies, these things that I've put out there. This observational study, okay? This isn't where they said we're going to randomize people to blood donation or not. This is looking at people who are blood donors. And you could say, well, wait a minute. If you're looking at people who are blood donors, they're probably more altruistic. They probably have a better outlook on life. They probably are more engaged in their community. How do you know that it was blood donation? All those are great questions, okay? But this is often the best we have when we talk about lifestyle research. So I'd love for one of you to say, well, Dr. DeRose, I'd love to partner with you. Why don't we do a study in our community, and we'll recruit people. We'll randomize them to give blood, to donate blood or not. Well, then some people could say, well, anyway. Drink more water. We talked some about this. This is just some review slides for you. Those of you that were here, you're reading very quickly. You're inspired that you've had an opportunity to review. Others of you that don't read quickly are frustrated with those doctors who do what they were not told to do in their basic training in medical lecturing. Okay, this is where we left off. What about a healthy beverage, and that is juicing, rising in popularity? So I'm going to give you some anecdotal data now, okay? So this is my clinical experience. So you're going to say, well, clinical experience, what is the standard of evidence there? Well, take a listen. I'll share it with you. And by the way, this actually has some research base. I think it was back, it might even be back in the 70s or the 80s. I think it was published in the journal Lancet. It's a classic study that looked at apple consumption. Do you remember this? Some of you may have seen it. And they looked at the physical form in which subjects ate apples. They had some groups eat like 100 calories, maybe it was 100 grams. 100 grams of apples, whole apples. Another group, may have even been the same group. I don't remember the study design. May have been a crossover study, but 100 grams of applesauce. Other group, 100 grams of apple juice. And they looked at things like blood sugar response. And what did they find? Yeah, blood sugar peaks quicker the more you refine the food, right? The other really interesting thing they found, they actually looked at satiety. And what happens? When you eat the whole plant food, you get much more satiety per calorie. So, do I ever prescribe juicing as a clinician? I was just counseling with someone the other day. Dr. DeRose, how do I gain weight? And one of the things that I've recommended to my patients over the years, we have counsel that it's, and we're learning more. Roger alluded to time-restricted feeding. God has designed for us to have intervals between our meals. If you've never read about the migrating motor complex, there's a whole the gut is designed to have periods of rest. And from my review of the literature, it takes about 5 hours before you get the full benefits of this migrating motor complex. And it does a number of interesting things. Among them is duodenal retroperistolysis. What does that mean? It means instead of things going from mouth to anus, during this phase, there's actual movement of things like bicarbonate from the small intestine back up into the stomach, buffering the stomach acid. Isn't this interesting? So there's these housekeeping functions, and they only happen when we fast for a period of time. So if I'm recommending juicing to someone, in addition to their meals, I will say, take the juice a half an hour before your meal. So I'm just making the meal time a little bit longer, okay? You allow me to do that? Whether you allow me to do it or not, I'm just telling you what I do. It's my clinical experience, okay? And if I'm trying to have someone put on more weight, that's one of the strategies we'll sometimes use. Of course, we'll use more calorically dense foods and other things as well. And I'm generally speaking to people, in fact, almost exclusively using a total vegetarian diet, okay? And that's what I'm instructing patients on. And we work with them regardless of where they're at. I mean, that is my philosophy. I don't fire patients if they want to have their bacon and cheese, but they will hear frequently what problems it's contributing to. Anyway, so here's where I'm going with this. How about the average patient that I see? How many of you think the average patient I see needs to gain weight? No, it's the opposite. So how many of them do you think I'm encouraging to juice? I'm generally not encouraging them to juice. Now, some of them say, but this is how I get my, greens and my fruits and my vegetables. And I say, if you're not going to get it any other way, sure, you may be getting more benefit than liability, but it's much better to eat the whole plant food. Okay? So, as we've talked here, low satiety with high calories, that's the problem with juices, can raise blood sugar in susceptible individuals, and it may be deleterious to digestive physiology. This is another interesting compound, epidermal growth factor, or urogastrone. This is actually made when we chew our food. Okay? If you're not chewing your food, then you're limiting this healing substance for your gut. I can't tell you how many people, even the first time they walk into my clinic, my virtual clinic, how many of them are on proton pump inhibitors or H2 blockers, these drugs that are used for acid-related conditions. And I wonder, does it have to do with their frequent eating and they're not chewing their food? I mean, you might think that's a strange question, but I really wonder if part of this epidemic, it's a pervasive problem. So the third point, we're talking about improving hemorrheology. Yes, you can donate blood. Yes, you can drink more water, but eating more plant foods. You say, well, we're already on this trajectory. And I don't know if you've thought about this lately, but what are some of the best sellers in the health food store? Have you ever just stood in a health food store, stand off to the side and look like you're maybe reading a book there and watch what people are buying? Be an interesting observational study that you could do. It seems like a lot of folks are buying these phytochemicals, whether they're lycopene or resveratrol or zeaxanthin, lutein, and very interesting. I should tell you about my grandfather. 3 of my grandparents were born in Italy, and Santo was born there. I am convinced, he died in his 90s, but I'm convinced he never heard of Anthocyanins. And I am certain he never bought an anthocyanin supplement. So, can we with reasonable certainty say he never got any benefit from anthocyanins. Can we say that? With reasonable confidence. I see especially the dietitians shaking their heads no, vehemently, the others of you being less vehement, but also indicating that phytochemicals come from plant sources. That's where they're naturally found. And anthocyanins just happen to be found in a lot of things that Santo ate on a regular basis throughout his life, like grapes and tomatoes and onions and garlic. I don't know that I ever was in the Puleo household and there weren't tomatoes, onions, and garlic. I don't think I don't know that there's ever a day in history where those things weren't there. So was he getting anthocyanins? So here's the practical message. You don't have to buy out the health food store to get the benefit of these supplements. The Creator has put them in the plant foods, okay? So when you're eating, you're getting cutting-edge nutrition before they've, 5 years from now, they may say, hey, we just found this new phytochemical. I was reading a review article on phytochemicals some years ago, and they were saying how many thousands of phytochemicals they discovered, and they said, and we estimate there are, I don't know what they said in that paper, 10,000 more that have not been discovered. I'm thinking, well, how do you estimate how many you haven't discovered, right? But the whole point is that there's all kinds of phytochemicals. We heard last night, we heard other presentations about different plants and how do those plants exert their benefits. It's generally, it could be through their macronutrients, it could be through their fiber content, but it's often through these unique phytochemicals. So anthocyanins, and if you look at a list of some of the benefits of anthocyanins, you'll see as you go down the list, you'll see some directly impact hemorrheology, right? Or at least blood flow, blood vessel relaxation, things that are antioxidant and anti-inflammatory, they tend to improve blood fluidity. And by the way, some other benefits, because yes, hemorrheology, improving it, there's research that suggests it decreases arthritis, decreases joint problems, helps with cancer. We looked at some of that research earlier. But the whole point is these plant foods that are helping your hemorrheology are giving you other benefits that help with these same concerns, right? And this is the beautiful thing about a comprehensive lifestyle. It's not like, oh boy, this is, what am I going to do? Am I going to go on the diabetes reversal program, the program for high blood pressure? Do I want to prevent heart disease? Which one do I want? It's all the same program, right? It's basic. Now, sure, are there nuances? Are there certain things you may want to target differently if you have certain risk factors for certain diseases? Yes. Are there certain, even natural therapies you may want to add in certain situations? Yes, definitely, depending on maybe some underlying risk factors. But we could go through a whole list of all kinds of phytochemicals. We've talked some about curcumin and turmeric, and I mentioned to you earlier that there's an interesting review some years ago, I think it was in the British Journal of Pharmacology, that actually looked at heavy metals and connections with neurodegenerative diseases like Parkinson's and Alzheimer's. And in that review, they were talking about phytochemicals that have heavy metal chelating effects. We talked about EGCG, epigallocatechin gallate, which is found in green tea. And I tried to give you some perspective on that. I don't recommend people drink green tea because you can also get these heavy metal chelators in things like turmeric and also quercetin. So, yeah, there's a number of things that can be used that have multiplicative benefits as we address these concerns. But you can see here, again, decreased platelet stickiness, platelet adhesion. You decrease that, you're going to improve blood fluidity. You see connections, again, with being anti-inflammatory and how that would impact blood fluidity. So we could just go through, and again, you could say, well, Dr. DeRose, but, do you have, because here's what we really want, in the medical community. You want to say, you just don't want to make a connection. You just don't want to see, and we've all heard the saying, correlation does not equal causation, right? So we can do a study, we can see two things are related, but it doesn't mean they're actually related in a cause and effect way, correct? So, but if we're looking at biological mechanisms and we're saying, well, it seems there's a biologically plausible reason why eating more plant foods would have benefits. And yes, we can go through data looking at how whole plant foods impact diseases that we know are affected by blood fluidity. But can I connect all the dots for you? Can I tell you, look, here's an intervention where we put someone on whole plant foods. We measured these hemorheologic variables, and they were lowered. And then we measured longitudinally in this population how their stroke risk and heart disease risk and dementia risk dropped. Can I do that for you? And I can't. So some people would say, well, some of this then you're conjecturing. You're stepping out. But do you see what I'm saying? So yes, there's different levels of evidence, but we can have confidence in associations that have been well established, and we can have confidence in pointing people in directions that we see biological plausibility for, we see scientific data supporting, and then we have inspiration that's helping us realize that we're not getting off the wrong track. You heard Dr. Kellogg mention the other day, and I didn't pull up that quote, but some of you may remember when Kellogg was asked how he was able to stay ahead of the medical profession. You remember? And he said in so many words, I refer to what's written in the spirit of prophecy. And if it's in harmony with it, I put all my energy into it. And if it's out of harmony with it, I just drop it. And so you might say, well, that's not cutting-edge medical science. I would say it's beyond cutting-edge medical science. But still, remember, the challenge is, when we deal with our communities, if I walk in and I share with them something that is not credible, or if they fact check it, they say, well, this is wrong. What does that do to my ability to minister to those people in my community? If it doesn't undermine it altogether, it significantly decreases it. So we need to be careful what we share. I mean, some of the things that we share are immaterial to the points we're making. And this is why when we come to a group like this, we should welcome dialogue, right? We should welcome it. So if you say, DeRose, I think, if you put up that slide again, I would change this because, I just read the latest on this, and they found that if you eat too much curcumin, you're going to have more cancer. And I'll say, really? I haven't seen that study. And so we'll look at it together. I told you we talk about over-the-counter supplement dangers, and I actually am concerned about even phytochemical supplements. Many supplements over the years have been found to be tainted by heavy metals, which can seriously undermine hemorrheology and circulatory health. I've given you a number of references there. This is a real concern because of the lack of regulation in the supplement industry. And that doesn't mean I don't recommend supplements ever, but we do need to be careful. I know, Roger, I think you shared something about a particular study. I actually like a group called, and I mentioned I have no disclosures. I have no, ownership interest in Consumer Labs. Do some of you use Consumer Labs? So Consumer Labs, go there, I think it's just consumerlabs.com, is an independent research lab where they actually vet supplements, okay? So they'll look at, alpha-lipoic acid supplements, and they'll say, does it really contain the amount of alpha-lipoic acid that it says? Are there contaminants in here? What is the price? And they'll give, so it's just like consumer reports for supplements called Consumer Labs. So it's a useful site to go to. So if my patient says, well, what supplement should I use? And I'm going to do the legwork, I'll go to Consumer Labs, and they do a lot of reviews on supplements and other things. So it's a subscription service. It's not, onerous. I think it's like $50 a year or something. But my point of telling you this is you get into problems with toxins, contaminants in supplements. It's a real concern. So even things that are good in and of themselves may not be good in excess. So all of you clinicians, I'm sure, have prescribed iron for patients, right? Haven't you? I've got patients who are anemic, patients who, sometimes it's a sign that they've got, blood loss or something. You work them up and maybe you fix the problem, but they're still, their hemoglobin's 11, and you're trying to get their hemoglobin up. Now, some of you say, well, why not just use, blackstrap molasses and a plant, rich diet. Yeah, I mean, you can do those things, but sometimes we're using iron supplementation. And it's not wrong to give iron supplementation to someone who's anemic and iron deficient, okay? But actually, there's some interesting literature, and it looks like the reference has slipped off the slide here. Is it on? Can it show up on your page there? Okay. No one can read that, huh? Oh, wow. What all did I have on that slide? Let me see if we can make it somewhat legible. Okay. There's a whole bunch of references there. Anyway, if you really want them, let me know. But yeah, I think there's a whole list of them. Somehow it got it's supposed to be in a real small font, but it's not. Anyway, but the point is, excess iron. There's data on, some of you in the OB field may realize this. There's evidence that actually giving extra iron to women who are iron replete, who have adequate iron stores, instead of helping them during their pregnancy, may actually increase their risk of eclampsia, or at least preeclampsia. So let me give you another analogy here, and this kind of comes back to this whole discussion we're having about standards of evidence. Just because you see a correlation, again, doesn't mean there's causation. One of the ones I really like in the supplement area, and it relates to what we're talking about, is research that was done years ago, observational studies on cigarette smokers. They actually found that cigarette smokers who had higher levels of beta-carotene in their blood had lower levels of lung cancer. Pretty exciting, right? So the hypothesis was that beta-carotene is protective for lung cancer. So what do? Yeah, the next step is a randomized controlled trial, right? So they randomized controlled trial, they give smokers beta-carotene supplements and follow them over time. What did they find? That's right, more cancer. And so how do you explain that? Well, the best explanation I've heard is that beta-carotene is just one of the family of retinoids that have many broad-reaching effects. Okay, and I see you have a comment too. You're going to help me out here. Oh, okay. Well, okay. So let me finish this point then. So it has these far-reaching effects, and basically, when you overwhelm the system with beta-carotene, you interfere with your body's ability to utilize other carotenoids and other retinoids. Okay? And so that's the thinking. So you may look and you may say there's this association, we're going to give everyone beta-carotene supplements, but what really should they have said? We're going to have everyone eat more whole plant foods to raise their beta-carotene levels further, right? That would be the appropriate conclusion. Okay, so we have a question or comment here. Do we have a roving mic that we can utilize? Okay, we've got Sarah getting her exercise.
So I was just wondering if you could suggest some foods that bind and remove excess iron.
Okay, yeah, so that was my point with compounds that have chelating effects, heavy metal chelating effects. And, really there's some, and I think Roger's going to speak some about this too. Right, or at least you're going to talk about one way we can avoid getting excess iron that we don't need, right? Well, I was trying to set him up to speak about red meat here in a little while. Yeah, sometimes the questions I ask are a little bit obtuse. So, but in some of the early data, looking at iron stores and cardiovascular risk, this is a group of Finnish researchers, probably back in the 90s. They actually found that iron levels were best correlated with red meat intake and alcohol consumption. And that you may try to wrap your minds around. But my point is, those are not things that I would recommend, okay, to raise iron levels. But, especially concentrated plant foods, dried fruits and things often have more micronutrients per volume, but they also give you more calories too. So sometimes we do end up supplementing with some of these micronutrients. Okay, let me hasten on with you folks. I'm not going to talk anymore about these different phytochemicals. There's a lot that we could talk about. Let me mention this, because I'm trying to give you this cross between some of the evidence base, some of my clinical experience, and translational stuff, how we work with patients. So, simple sugars, high fructose corn syrup, other things are deleterious to hemorrheology. So we're trying to help people decrease. And by the way, if you don't realize this, high fructose corn syrup is also a risk factor for gout. Okay, so that's not on a lot of people's radar screens, but it is can raise uric acid levels as well. So if you look here, we have our patients or people that go through our program. This is, I think, actually a graphic that's in the free program. May or may not be in there. But this is the rule of thumb that we use, and that is you actually look at the total carbohydrates, you divide it by the total sugars, and we recommend that our patients have a ratio of at least 5 or larger. So at least 5 times more total carbohydrate than sugar to qualify as a lower sugar option. And so we're trying to move people in the direction of less sugar. If you say, well, wouldn't it be better if it had 0 total sugars? Well, it may have raisins or something in it, something that you wouldn't find objectionable, or date pieces. So this is going to look at total simple sugars in the item. But this is what we recommend. And why we recommend it, and some of you may realize this, is there's a place in the grocery store that I call the candy aisle in disguise. That's right, it's a cereal aisle. No, really, I mean, you look at the sugar content of some of these cereals, I mean, it's just over the top. And so again, if we're trying to help our patients with weight loss, because remember, well, maybe you don't remember. Here it is. One of the determinants of hemorrheology is weight. So the more we weigh, the worse our blood fluidity tends to be. The more fat mass we have, the worse our hemorrheology. And this is kind of an interesting observational study. So you can say case control here, right? If you want to use it that way, with the cases being obesity and the controls being normal weight. So it's matched 1 for 1. And what did they find? They found basically higher CRP levels. It's a marker of inflammation, C-reactive protein, higher fibrinogen, higher plasma viscosity. What are all these determinants of? For those of you that were here Friday, these are all determinants of hemorrheology. And the worse your body fat mass, the greater your body fat stores. Now this is not, here's the challenge. We talked a little bit about this yesterday. When we're presenting material, how do we present things in a way that we don't victimize people, okay? And what I always tell my patients, when I meet someone says, well, you probably think I'm not very healthy because I have extra weight on my body. Well, what I tell them is I don't know how much you'd weigh if you were not as conscientious as you were, okay? No, I mean, really. I mean, I've dealt with patients, weigh over 600 pounds. And if you saw them when they were down to 350, what would you say? I mean, they weren't 7'5" either, okay? So, you'd look at the person and you'd say, boy, they're really overweight. I mean, what's their problem? They're not in a very good lifestyle. They've lost 300 pounds. So here's the point. We don't, I used to run a hospital-based weight loss program. And what I tell people is, we don't know your early life history. We don't know your intrauterine history. Do you know your risk of high blood pressure, your risk of diabetes, your risk of weight gain is partly programmed by what happened in the womb? Do you realize that? So, I mean, who am I to judge anyone else? Who are you? And who are you to look in the mirror and say, well, I can't do any health programs in my church because, I weigh 50 pounds more than my sister weighs. Well, your sister wasn't in the womb at the same time as you. She doesn't have the same genetics as you. She doesn't have the same early life history. So there's all these determinants, okay, of weight. And so when I worked with patients, I didn't want them to have a goal weight, because what they would do is they'd lose 100 pounds and their goal weight was to be 20 pounds less than that, and it was not achievable. They couldn't spend 5 hours in the gym and eat 600 calories a day, okay? It just wasn't going to happen. So here's the point. Yes, carrying extra fat mass worsens hemorrheology, but you may be doing the best you can. Here's my definition of an ideal weight. Do you want it? Because I told you we talk about weight loss and try to give you some practical pointers. You want to know my definition of an ideal weight? It is what you weigh on an ideal lifestyle. That is an ideal weight, what you weigh in an ideal lifestyle. So you might say, well, I'm not on an ideal lifestyle. Well, do the best you can. Get as close as you can. Because some people just aren't, you're not going to be the same as your sister or your husband or your wife or whatever, okay? So I don't want to belabor the point, but it's really important. And what goes on with all these things are interrelated. I just want you to see that picture. If you didn't pick it up in the first presentation, as you impact blood fluidity, there's this not only causal, but it's this vicious cycle where poor blood fluidity raises insulin resistance, it worsens inflammation. We talked about some of these mechanisms earlier. And what do inflammation and insulin resistance do? Well, they in turn alter other factors that worsen blood fluidity. So it's this vicious cycle. And it's a beautiful thing about lifestyle. When you start helping people adopt healthier lifestyle habits, there's these feed-forward effects, if you will, where it starts making it easier for them to do other practical lifestyle changes. Okay? Now, this is really interesting, and I don't know how much we want to go into this, but losing body fat improves hemorrheology, and this is true even if you're thin. Okay? So this is a study of athletes, and they actually found that if you look at this marker of blood fluidity, red cell aggregation, that the less body fat that athletes even, so there are people with low body, so you say, now I'm really discouraged. I thought I was doing good. I was looking around the room and starting to smile because I looked like I was thinner than some of the other people. No, we're all in this together. Okay, this is part of the beauty of lifestyle. If we understand it rightly, we're all on this journey together. Okay, it's the same as the biblical health message, right? The biblical whole health message. I'm speaking of spiritual health as well. Jim? Yeah, so rouleau is is red cells stacking together, if you will, as they're lining up. But red cell aggregation can impact more than just rouleau, okay? Because, yes, they'll be more prone to that, but it's basically anything that impairs red cell movement. If the red cells tend to adhere more to each other, even in larger vessels. So usually we think of rouleau more on the smaller blood vessels. By the way, just a reminder of physiology. The capillary diameter is over half as small as the diameter of the red cell. So your red cells literally have to squeeze through your capillaries. And I believe the Creator designed it that way to maximize contact between the red cell and the capillary wall, but that's another discussion. But the point is, if they can't squeeze through individually, you're going to have impairment of the microcirculation. Okay, what are other things that can help us as far as blood fluidity? Who's keeping me oriented as to how long I have this morning? 10:45, okay. So daily exercise. And, just kind of some simple observations. The more you exercise, the better your blood fluidity tends to be. So, and by the way, just sitting for even a short period of time actually impairs blood fluidity. So this is why it's good that they have the water in back, that they don't have people serving you. So you have an excuse, even during the lectures, you can get up and walk to the back and get some water and then come back to your chair. Everyone just thinks you're not only attentive, but you're also, getting exercise and hydrating. It also helps you by decreasing body fat, but even if you don't, and I don't think we'll look at this data, but even if you never lost a pound, exercise is powerful as far as improving blood fluidity and also as far as addressing a host of other chronic disease risk factors. Some of the folks that have done a lot of research with this are at the Cooper Institute there in Dallas, and some of you that have been active in exercise science or have followed this literature for years, they're the first ones that I know that were talking about these, fitness and fatness and making these comparisons. And basically the bottom line take-home point is you're better off to be, quote, fat or overweight and fit than you are to be unfit and thin, in at least a lot of the data that they have. Now, there are some limitations, And let me just mention a couple of examples here. So fibrinogen levels are lowest in those who were most fit regardless of weight status. Okay, that's in this data from the Cooper Institute. But obese individuals with high fitness tended to have significantly lower fibrinogen levels than thin folks who are fit. You say, that's saying the same thing, isn't it? Yeah, pretty much, but let me show you this. White blood count, another indicator of blood fluidity, was higher the heavier a person was. So, and that was independent of fitness status. So there are some markers of blood fluidity that just exercising addresses them, even if the weight doesn't change. Others, if you can lose a little bit of weight, it's going to further help your blood fluidity. Let me just give you some encouragement from the pen of inspiration. Go out and exercise how often? Every day, even though some things indoors have to be neglected. Here's one of my favorite statements, also from the same source, My Life Today, page 136. Morning exercise and walking in the free, invigorating air of heaven or cultivating flowers, small fruits, and vegetables is necessary to what? Healthful circulation of the blood. I wonder if some of her editors had known about hemorrheology, if they would have substituted it there. It's necessary for optimal hemorrheology. Say, no, leave it healthful circulation of the blood. But then look at this. It is the surest safeguard against what? Colds, coughs, and 100 other diseases. How many of you think that sounds like a good remedy? I'll go along with that. And what I'm trying to show you is it's very interesting because the connection here, she's speaking about hemorrheology, I mean, overtly. And she's making this connection that the literature actually makes. Again, do we have a randomized controlled trial that shows 100 other diseases, tying it in with amount of exercise, specific improvement in certain hemorrheologic parameters, and lowering of risk of those diseases? Do we have that data out there? No, we don't have, you see what I'm saying? We don't have all those dots connected, but do we have enough evidence that we can say, with some degree of confidence, we can share this, but yet sharing it as learners, okay? We're on a journey together, and not making it as, someone could say, well, here's a scenario, X, Y, Z. We don't know all the nuances. Okay, let's talk a little bit about this. So this is a review looking at blood pressure lowering effects relating to exercise. And this particular group did a series of reviews looking at different types of exercise. And one that's especially interesting that we had in your learning objectives is isometric exercise. And this seems to help with hemorrheology, helps with oxidative stress, and actually has direct blood pressure lowering effects. This is data on isometric hand grip exercise from the same reference. There's several studies that looked at this. Did you know that as little as 8 minutes a day, 3 to 5 days a week for 6 weeks can lower your blood pressure in the range of 13 points systolic and 6 points diastolic? It's a relative, so it's isometric hand grip exercise. Isometric doesn't mean you're doing, using the grip strength device this way. You're holding it. The protocols, you hold 30% of your maximal contraction for 2 minutes. With one hand, you rest for a minute, do the other hand 2 minutes, do 2 sets, each hand. So 2 minutes each, 3 minutes of rest, so it takes about 11 minutes, and that's the protocol. And doing that 3 to 5 times a day, actually 3 to 5 times a week, 3 to 5 times a week for 6 weeks or more to get benefit. There you have it right there, at least 6 weeks, 4 sets of the exercise, 2 on each side, and 2 using the non-dominant hand. And there's the reference.